The fall economic update is out, and it is very bad news, especially for young Canadians. The Trudeau government releases its mandate letters showing just how dishonest, delusional, and ideologically left-wing they are. The Conservative Party of Canada has some major soul-searching to do, and Greta shows us her true colors, and it is not a very flattering look. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We have a lot to get to, so let's jump right into it. So on Monday, Justin Trudeau's finance minister, Bill Morneau, delivered the fall economic update. This update gives Canadians an idea of how the country's financial health is doing. And Bill Morneau said that Canada's economy is sound and growing at a solid pace. That's an interesting comment given that the economy shed 71,000 jobs in November, but the government boasted that employment is still up nearly 400,000 from the 2018 levels. Now, this is the most concerning aspect of all in the fall economic update, is that the deficit is expected to rise to 26.6 billion this year. And they released the projected deficits. There is no end in sight. Absolutely no end in sight, no sense of fiscal sanity or any type of responsibility here. The Trudeau government is just stepping on the gas towards an economic cliff, spending out of control. Let me just read you these figures because they are astronomical. So the 2019-2020 deficit is projected to be $26.6 billion. Next year, it's expected to go up again to $28.1 billion. I mean, we basically have endless deficits for the next decade. And it is just really out of control. So this is what you get when you elect a Liberal government. They have absolutely no sense of restraint and responsibility. Just, spending money, giving it away. This will obviously lead to higher taxes in the future or reduced services. It will also lead to an increase in interest on the debt, paying interest on the debt, which is already one of the largest expenditures in government. This is exactly what we saw, by the way, in Ontario with the Liberals first under Dalton McGuinty and then Kathleen Wynne. They just absolutely put Ontario into a massive, massive fiscal hole that future taxpayers and future Canadians will be stuck on the hook for. And given that the economy is doing pretty well, I mean, we haven't had a recession in almost a decade. This is now the time where we should be putting money towards the debt, saving, getting ready just in case there is a financial recession. A lot of people are predicting a recession in this year or next year. And the fact that we are just spending away, what's going to happen when there's an actual recession? And we might actually want to spend more than we bring in. The Trudeau government is just absolutely reckless and irresponsible. And that is what we learned today. Another really strange aspect of this budget is the gender-based analysis program the Trudeau government brought in a few years ago. This is, remember, the government wants to look specifically at how their spending measures and how their government policies influence women. Well, they have expanded it even more into the realm of identity politics. So this economic update says, quote, "The Gender-Based Analysis Plus is an analytical process used to assess how diverse groups of women, men, and non-binary people may experience policies, programs, and initiatives. GBA Plus goes beyond gender to consider additional identity factors such as ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, income level, mental and physical ability." So gender-based analysis is no longer just about gender. It's about everything. This is identity politics and intersectionality. It's kind of interesting though, because, they've included so many different things about an individual that it basically applies to every single person. There's so many different diverse groups that we basically are just back to looking at individuals. I'm for the government considering how their budgets are going to implement actual individuals. Maybe they should think about how they're spending and overspending and driving Canadians into debt, how that impacts regular people. That would be nice. So in a similar vein, last Friday, the Trudeau government released its mandate letters. This is Justin Trudeau writing a letter, an open letter to every minister in his cabinet, basically telling them what they should do, what he wants them to accomplish in this term. And it gives us a kind of sneak peek into what the government believes. And let me tell you, these people are very ideologically left-wing. They're delusional and they're incredibly dishonest. So let me give you a few examples. So the main thing that everyone was talking about was the Minister of Heritage. And the Minister of Heritage has been assigned, quote, "create new regulations for social media platforms, starting with a requirement that all platforms remove illegal content, including hate speech, within 24 hours or face significant penalties. This should include other online harms such as radicalization, incitement to violence, exploitation of children, or the creation and distribution of terrorist propaganda. So the problematic element, of course, is that the government wants basically to regulate social media, regulate Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, all of the platforms that we like to use to express ourselves, while the Trudeau government doesn't want us to express ourselves. And there's so many crazy aspects to this platform or to the statement, basically giving social media a 24-hour window. You cannot make a good decision within 24 hours, so there's no opportunity to appeal, to say, this is taken out of context, or that's not the meaning that I had when I wrote that down. The Trudeau government just wants platforms to remove content essentially that they don't like, and you know what this means. You know that this isn't geared towards maybe radicalization in some ethnic groups, towards Islamist terrorism or Khalistani terrorism or other kinds of extremism. Hopefully that will be included in all this, but you know that what they're really talking about is right-wing speech, criticism of Justin Trudeau, criticism of the woke left and the SJW culture that's taking over. This is a measure to censor speech on the internet. This is incredibly chilling, very, very troubling. Their definitions are not well defined. And this wasn't the only aspect alluding to this. There was also the Minister of Public Safety was told to also work towards censoring the internet. This is a quote from that mandate letter. Work with the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth and the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada to combat online hate and harassment. Continue to invest in resources to counter the rise of ideologically motivated violent extremism and terrorist organizations. So again, they're not talking about all hate. Hate is a human emotion that everyone possesses. There's a lot of hate on the internet. People writing about their hatred for their ex-boyfriends or girlfriends. People writing about their hatred of a sports team that they don't like. That's not the kind of hate that these government ministers are now looking into cracking down on. Of course, they're talking mostly about conservatives and cracking down on our free speech. So Canadians should be very alarmed about this, and they should fight back against it. You might have noticed one of the new ministers that the government has created, that Trudeau created, is the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth. The fact that we now have a Ministry of Diversity and Inclusion is a little unfortunate, given that those words don't really have a lot of meaning, and basically what it is a minister to impose left-wing ideological views, including, again, intersectionality and identity politics. The government is going to introduce unconscious bias training for all security officials and all police officers. They have basically an entire ministry just to push the identity politics shtick on us. Here's a list of all the things that person is going to be doing. Advance and expand Canada's anti-racism strategy. Ensure community-based projects are prioritized and met with the goals and outcomes of the strategy. Work with the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Women to improve the quality and scope of the gender-based analysis in future budgets. Yada, yada, yada. This is just all new speak, and again, promoting the kind of divisive racism, dividing Canadians up and pitting us against each other. The final one in these mandate letters that I want to talk about is the Minister of Immigration. So in here, we learned that the government between 2020 and 2022 will be bringing in more than 1 million new permanent residents to Canada. And so that's a pretty substantial increase to the number of newcomers. But just as importantly, the fact that they are talking about bringing in 1 million newcomers to Canada is that they don't mention anything about illegal immigrants. They don't mention anything about the surge of illegal border crossers, the surge of asylum seekers coming to Canada, the sort of surge of this parallel illegal immigration system. So we have the 1 million people coming legally through our channels, but we also have 50,000 or so submitting asylum applications every year, people who have entered Canada illegally. There was also a bombshell report that came out earlier this fall about the fact that about 30% of people who are here on student visas, study permits, aren't actually enrolled in any kind of post-secondary education system. And there is a huge black market with crooked immigration consultants encouraging people to come to Canada this way because it's the easiest way to get into Canada and to get access to permanent residency. So the fact that we have all of these problems with illegal immigration, and the government doesn't even acknowledge them, doesn't recognize them, just pretends that they don't exist. And then they focus so much on these sort of legal programs. It shows that we really do have these two parallel programs, and the government is either completely naive to the illegal black market, or they just don't care because they want more people to come to Canada, and they're willing to turn a blind eye to the fact that so many people are breaking the rules and cheating to come to Canada. And let me just point out, my major criticism of the Trudeau government's immigration program is that their programs and their lack of attention to illegal immigration is turning public opinion against immigration as a whole. So how can you maintain a successful immigration program when more and more Canadians are just frustrated and disillusioned over the fact that there's so much illegal immigration? The Trudeau government is squandering what used to be a pretty universal consensus on immigration, and because of them, more and more people are going towards an anti-immigration sentiment, which is not good for the country. Okay. The big news last week and heading into the weekend was the fact that Conservative leader Andrew Scheer has resigned as leader of the Conservative Party, sort of a shock to a lot of us. And the kind of infighting is continuing over the party. So there was sort of a mini scandal that emerged over whether or not it was approved that Andrew Scheer was using party resources, funds raised by the Conservative Party of Canada, to pay for his children to go to private Catholic school in Ottawa. Both Andrew Scheer and the former president of the party, Dustin Van Voot, claimed that it was okay, that it had been approved and he didn't do anything wrong. But the media was pushing the story, and the optics of it are quite bad. This is from a Globe and Mail report on the topic. The internal dispute comes as leadership contenders start to organize behind the scenes, and contenders will be asked if they support paying private school fees for the leader in a party that prides itself on being anti-elitist. One source close to Mr. Harper told the Globe the former Prime Minister never charged any personal expenses to the Conservative Party, neither did former interim leader Rona Ambrose, because they knew that would upset party donors. One source said Mr. Scheer does not believe he did anything wrong by having the party pay his children's private school fees. A separate Conservative source said Mr. Scheer believes he followed the party's rules. He was under the impression others involved in the payments had as well. It's rare for party money to fund private education for leaders' children. Mr. Harper sent his children to public school, as does Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. However, parties generally do pay for leaders' travel, wardrobe, makeup when it's work-related. So unfortunately, Dustin Van Voot got thrown under the bus and he got fired over all of this. I think it's a little silly. If Andrew Scheer wants to send his children to Catholic school, he should. He should be allowed to. It shouldn't be seen as elitist. It shouldn't be seen as counter to what a leader should do. Look, the truth of the matter is that public education is not even a federal jurisdiction. It's under the provincial jurisdiction. And if you happen to be critical of public education and public school unions, you should be able to pull your kids and put them into private school or homeschool them or put them into some kind of an alternative school, as more and more people do. The idea that if you're a politician, you must put your children into public school, I think is nonsense. I think that we should promote school choice and that people should be able to put their kids in whatever school that they want. So this is just all a silly kind of scandal. It's unfortunate to see this kind of infighting in the party. Although I think that if you are a donor to the Conservative Party of Canada, you have the right to be upset that your funds were going to something that wasn't disclosed. I think Andrew Scheer should have been a lot more forthcoming about this. But that was sort of one of his problems as leader, is that he wasn't always the most forthcoming person. And so now we're going into a leadership race to see who will succeed Andrew Scheer. I think we're going to be focusing a lot about this. True North is going to be covering it all the way through. So you can always check out tnc.news for the latest. I personally hope that it's someone who is not just another Harper era cabinet minister or high profile MP from that era. I think the Conservatives need someone fresh, some change, someone who is has the courage to stand up for conservative ideas and values, who is willing to push back against the media when they're being biased and anti-conservative, someone who can kind of excite the base. I think that Boris Johnson over in the UK, who just won in a landslide, shows a really good example of how, you could have someone who is a true conservative, who believes in conservative values and ideas, unafraid to articulate them, unafraid to push back, and they don't feel like they're always apologizing for being conservative. And I think that would go a long way. Let's move on. Final story here. Greta Thunberg got herself into a little bit of hot water over a comment that she made. So this is her quote that she said: "We have to make sure that they cannot do that." She's talking about politicians who don't follow her very alarmist ideas of what we should do to combat climate change. "We will put them against the wall and that they will do their jobs and protect our futures. So putting them against the wall. Greta later apologized for the statement, saying that it was Swenglish, so a mix of Swedish and English, and that she thought that putting someone against the wall means to hold someone accountable for their actions. That's what happens when you improvise speeches in a second language, she said. Well, of course, in English, that expression, putting someone against the wall, is a euphemism for execution. So it makes it seem like she's trying to be violent against world leaders that disagree with her. This is sort of nothing new for environmentalists. They often expose themselves to be quite fascist and, willing to use violence to get their means. David Suzuki, the sort of most high-profile Canadian environmentalist, once said something with a similar sentiment. He said that he wanted to jail politicians who ignore climate science. This is a quote from David Suzuki. What I would challenge you to do is to put a lot of effort into trying to see whether there's a legal way of throwing our so-called leaders into jail, because what they're doing is criminal. So again, this is the true sort of authoritarian impulses of the environmental left. I feel like things are sort of starting to fall apart for Greta. The more that she shows her true colors and shows us who she is, the more people just really see that she is an extremist. And also she's kind of a spoiled brat. There's a real lack of gratitude when you look at Greta and her life. She's one of the most privileged people in the world, from one of the most privileged generations in human history. And yet she is incredibly angry and ungrateful for everything around her. So as you know, she doesn't fly. She refuses to fly. So she's on her way back home, and she tweeted this: traveling on overcrowded trains through Germany, and I'm finally on my way. And then you see a picture of her sitting on the ground with all of her luggage and all of her stuff, eating Chinese takeaway. I like how she, first of all, complains about being on an overcrowded train. I mean, her idea is that we shouldn't be able to fly and that we shouldn't have private cars. So overcrowded trains would be like one of the only ways that we could travel. And the more you force people onto a train, the more overcrowded they're going to be. Okay, well, this is kind of amusing, because the railway in Germany, the organization that runs the railways, tweeted back and responded in a very amusing way. So first, this is being translated from German. They said, "Love Greta, thank you for supporting us railway workers in our fight against climate change. We're pleased that you are on our train and with 100% green electricity." And then in the second tweet, they kind of pushed back a little bit. Said, "It would have been even nicer if you had also reported how friendly and competent you were looked after by our team at your seat in first class." Oh, burn. So Greta was sitting up in first class, being taken care of by a team of railway workers, and yet she still felt the need to virtue signal and to complain and to make it seem like she's really hard done by. Well, that is Greta in a nutshell. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will be back on Thursday.